What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the vlog, episode number 21, I think. We are here on a Saturday. It is Orange City Racing and Car Club's Lucky Sevens promotion. That's $777 high hands every 15 minutes for select hours. So I'm here just before noon, looking to get a seat kind of early and looking to play all afternoon, try to make some money and bring you guys some content. So if you enjoy it, like and subscribe. Let's get to it. We're going to start things off in the small blind with 10 jack offsuit. There's a call from under the gun and it folds all the way around to the cutoff who calls. When the action gets to me, I bump it up to $12. The big blind folds, but both limpers call, so we're off to the flop three ways. The flop is ace 5-8 with two hearts. I check my action and the action checks through, so we're off to the turn. The turn is an 8 of clubs, so with no one showing any interest in this pot, I go ahead and bet out for $17. Plus, as the pre-flop raiser, I can definitely have an ace in my range. However, they both end up making the call, so we're off to the river three ways. The river is a 7 of clubs, so I missed, but so did the heart draw. I check, and under the gun leads out for $20. The cutoff folds and it's back to me. Even if he's betting with a missed flush draw, he probably has an ace or a king in his hand. If I raise, his only play will be to reshove because he's short stacked, so I end up folding. We're in the hijack now and we look down at Queen 10 of spades. Under the gun opens the action for $10. It folds to the low jack who makes the call. I make the call and everybody else folds, so we're off to the flop three ways. The flop is 8 jack 3 rainbow, so I flopped an inside straight draw. Under the gun continues on for $10 this time. The low jack makes the call and I decide to go ahead and put in a raise, and I raised to $35. Theoretically, I can have ace jack, pocket eights, pocket threes, or even a suited Broadway hand like the one that I have. Unfortunately, no one is buying that shit, and they both call, so we're off to the turn three ways. The turn is a 7 of spades, and now I've picked up a flush draw. The action checks to me, and I should be betting here with the extra equity that I've picked up to try to fold out other draws or weak hands, but I just check, so we're off to the river. The river's not a great card, it's a 10 of hearts, and the player in early position shoves all in for about $90 effective. The low jack folds and it's back on me. With a 4-liner to the straight and me having a queen blocking some straight draws, there's just not a lot that I beat, so I make the fold. My opponent was nice enough to reveal his hand, and he had pocket nines for the rivered straight. In the next hand, we're in the big blind, and we look down at King 10 of clubs. It folds to +1, who bumps it up to $10. I'm the only caller from the big blind. I think there's probably merits to making a raise because I'll be playing the hand out of position, and perhaps I can take it down pre-flop without having to see any cards. But what I'm worried about is if I get called and I don't hit the flop, then I have to play this hand out of position. So I just call, we're off to the flop heads up. The flop is King 7-5 with two spades, so caught top pair here. I go ahead and bet out for $20. My opponent makes the call, so we're off to the turn. The turn's not a great card, it's an ace of diamonds. I check and my opponent bets $35. He can definitely have an ace here, but he can also have spades, or you can have a king here as well, so I go ahead and peel one off. We're off to the river. The river is a blank. The flush and the Broadway draws both missed. So I decide I'm going to go ahead and make a play and represent a super strong hand, and I shove my whole stack in. Unfortunately, my opponent snap calls and he shows ace-9 for two pair. I don't hate the play I made, I just hate the time that I chose to make it. In a very frustrating hand, we're in the hijack and we look down at pocket sixes. Under the gun bumps it up to $11, but I actually don't see it, and so I called $2 not realizing it was 11. So I end up calling the 11. I'm heads up with under the gun off to the flop. The flop is deuce 8-10. My opponent c-bets for $27. Given that I think this is a board that doesn't really connect with him all that much as the raiser, I go ahead and make the call. We're off to the turn. The turn is the ace of spades, so it's kind of a bad card. However, my opponent slows down and checks, and given that this turn hits him more than me, I go ahead and just decide to check behind. The river is an 8, so it pairs the board, and once again my opponent checks over to me. So I don't think he has an ace now, especially since he checked turn and river, so I need to bet something to represent the ace myself. And so I settle on a bet of $25, which is awful. To no surprise, he snap calls, and he shows pocket queens. He tells me he was expecting a $75 to $80 bet, and that can get him to fold there. Of course it can. $75 actually applies some pressure. Just a horribly played hand on my part. There's an under the gun straddle. We're in the hijack with Queen 10 of spades. The low jack calls, and so when the action gets to me, I decide to go ahead and put the squeeze in and raise to $25. Only the low jack calls, so we're off to a flop heads up. It was at this moment that I was talking to a vlog watcher, Jay, who's a super nice guy. We tangled a little bit in episode 11. My opponent pauses for a second, then checks his cards and checks to me. I pick up on this as a sign of weakness and that he's searching to see if he has some sort of flush draw, and so I decided to go ahead and pounce, and I bet out for $65. My opponent thinks about it, but then he ends up letting his hand go. And it made one of my opponents realize that he and I had played a hand together about a month ago where I took him, in episode 18 I think it is. There's two limpers, and as one guy limps, he makes the comment,
"Don't put me on there.
And my opponent makes the call. Again, he mentions he does not want to make the vlog for playing a losing hand.
What did I just tell him? Don't put me on YouTube. Me getting beat down. First hand is gonna be. Thank you.
I got all the draws in the world. That's one of them. Straight.
Thank you. Put it on YouTube.
Don't worry.
Also, I didn't want to be rude, but I was also trying to play the hand, so my details may be a little bit fuzzy. But the flop brought on one spade, and the action actually checked through, so we went to the turn. The turn is another spade, so now I've picked up a flush draw. The low jack bets out $20, and while I'm trying to talk to Jay and play at the same time, I just end up making the call with my spade draw, and we're off to the river. The river is a jack of spades, a pretty good card. Again, my opponent leads for $25, and I actually feel kind of guilty that he just rehashed losing a hand to me on the river, and now I've done it again. So I just end up making the call. He flips over ace-king offsuit.
You gotta be kidding me. Oh, I'm not betting enough, so it's my own fault. But I mean, I just said it, and it happened again.
And so I win here, but to be fair, he did check the flop, allowing me to turn my draw for free, and I was getting about 3-1 on the turn when I called with my draw and 2 overs. Sorry, buddy, but you're going to make the vlog again. We're on the button this time, and we look down at ace-10 offsuit. It folds around to the cutoff, who raises to $10. I make the call, and the big blind calls as well, so we're off to a flop 3 ways. The flop is 10-7 deuce with 2 hearts. The player in middle position leads for $20. It folds to me. With top pair and no heart blocking the flush draw, I decide to raise to try to realize my equity, and I raise to $60. The big blind folds. My opponent is thinking, and then he also ends up folding, telling me nice hand. We're in the low jack this time with ace-queen of hearts. There's one caller before the action gets to me, and I raise to $15. The button is the only caller, so we're off to a flop heads up. The flop is 8, 9, 10 rainbow, so I flopped a gut shot here. I check, and my opponent checks right behind, so we're off to the turn. The turn is a 9 of clubs. It pairs the board. So I take the betting lead here and bet $25, looking to steal the pot, but my opponent calls, so we're off to the river. The river is a 9 of diamonds, so now there's 3 9s on the board. I decide to go ahead and check because I don't think there's much I can represent except my exact hand. Luckily, my opponent checks back, but he shows pocket 6s for the win. We're in the cutoff this time, and we look down at ace-jack offsuit. It folds to +1, who limps. The hijack limps, and so I bump it up to $15. The small blind makes the call, under the gun makes the call, but the hijack folds, so we're off to the flop 3 ways. The flop is 9 deuce queen. The action checks to me, and I continue on for $35. The small blind folds, but under the gun calls, so we're off to the turn. The turn is another queen, and my opponent slows down and checks, and so I check behind for a little bit of pot control. I don't want to inflate this pot, only having ace high. The river is a blank that won't change anything, and my opponent then leads into me for $20. It's such a small bet. I don't beat anything, but I'm getting nearly 7-1 to make this call. It absolutely screams value, but I really want to know if this guy has a queen. So I make the call, and I shouldn't be surprised he flips over king-queen. It's another bad call here. Raising would have only made it worse, but still just a terrible play by me on the river. At this point, I'm in for about $500, and I only have about $190 in front of me, and I'm playing terribly. I need to tighten up and dig out of this hole. So I do something I don't normally do. I decide to go ahead and get a table transfer to try to change things up. Let's see how it goes in a new table. We're under the gun this hand, and we look down at pocket 3s. I go ahead and limp, plus 1 limps as well. The button limps, the small blind folds, and the big blind checks, so we're off to the flop 4 ways. The flop is 3 jack queen with 2 spades, so I flop bottom set here. I'm always very aggressive with my sets, so I actually want to try to slow down when I have the nuts and let people bet. So I check, and it checks all the way to the button, who fires out for $9. It's a pot-sized bet. I consider a raise, but in this case I want to keep all his bluffs in with my made hands, and sometimes you just have to slow down a little bit for bigger pots overall. So I just make the call. There's one other caller. We're off to the turn. The turn is the ace of clubs, and so now with the board a little bit more connected, I'm worried about the strength of my hand, but I can't risk checking it to him and giving him the chance to catch up, so I bet $25, about 3/4 the pot. My opponent thinks about it, and he makes the call. The other opponent gets out of the way. We're off to the river. The river is a 10 of spades, just an absolutely gross card. Everything gets there. I check my action. Luckily, my opponent checks behind, but he shows king 10 for the turn straight. Just a gross run out for bottom set. In the very next hand, we're in the big blind, and we look down at pocket 5s. Under the gun and plus 1 both limp. Plus 2 bumps it up to $10. The small blind calls, I make the call, and both the original limpers call, so we're off to the flop 5 ways. The flop is 5 deuce 7, so I flop middle set here. The small blind checks. I bet out for $20. Under the gun and plus 1 both fold, but plus 2 makes the call. The small blind folds. We're off to the turn. The turn is a jack of diamonds. It brings a second flush draw on the board. Frustrated and worried about 2 flush draws, I jam for about $110 effective. He thinks, but then he folds, so I win this hand. At this point, I had been playing for about 3 hours and I was down $300, and I decided to go ahead and just pack up my camera at this point. I kind of noticed that I'm just too distracted trying to film and take notes and all the stuff that goes with making a vlog, and I decided I just wanted to focus on the poker. I did meet a few more vlog watchers while I was there, which was really cool. I always enjoy talking to viewers, but I've got to focus on cards. I'm not sure there's a hand that I've played well today, and it's starting to get expensive. However, I did find myself in some really interesting spots after I packed my camera away, and I want to tell you about them. We were in late position when we looked down at ace-king offsuit. There are 2 callers before I bump the action up to $12. It folds around to under the gun, who then 3-bets me to $45. The action folds back to me. I have the option to call and play the hand in position, but I want to put pressure on hands like pocket 10s, pocket jacks, and even pocket queens, so I jam for $191 total. He started talking to me a little bit and asking how often I 4-bet jam pre-flop. We chatted back and forth, and I actually ended up talking him into a call. When the flop comes out, there's an ace on the board, so I go ahead and roll my hand over. The rest of the board runs out clean, and he shows pocket jacks before mucking. Feels good to scoop a big pot my way. We're in the cutoff now. We look down at ace-queen offsuit. There's one early position caller before I bump it up to $15. The button calls, and the super aggressive player in the big blind calls, so we're off to the flop 3 ways. The flop is 9-10 jack with 2 spades. The big blind checks, and I check, and the button bets $20. The aggressive player in the big blind calls, and so I decided to go ahead and put a raise in, and I bump it up to $60. I want to put pressure on other hands on such a connected board. The button makes the call, and the big blind actually folds, so we're off to the turn. Turn's a great card. It's a king of diamonds. So, having this board pretty locked up right now, I go ahead and check, hoping he'll go ahead and continue betting, but he actually checks behind. I think at this point, we're actually probably chopping with a clean river. The river is a jack of clubs, so it pairs the board. It's a very interesting card. I go ahead and put a bet out of $45, trying to get some value from any one of those hands. It's probably a little bit small, but I want to give him a price too good to pass up with any 2-pair hands or set hands. He's thinking, he asks if I really have it, he flashes me king 10 and ends up folding. I tell him I can't show because it'd give away way too much information at the table, but later on when I ran into him, I let him know that I had it. There's a button straddle from a very aggressive player. I'm under the gun with ace-queen offsuit. It folds to me, and I bump it up to $20. The straddler is my only caller, so we're off to a flop heads up. The flop is ace high. I check, and he bets out for $20. Because he's so aggressive, I want to start getting chips in the middle right now, so I raise to $60. He doesn't think too long before calling, so we're off to the turn. The turn is an interesting card. It's an ace of clubs. So on this card, I decided to go ahead and take the lead, and I bet out for $60, knowing I can get some action from this opponent. I also need to protect my hand, though, against flush draws. And my opponent makes the call, so we're off to the river. The river is a blank. The draws don't get there. I have about $160 in my stack, and I think jamming for all of it just looks too strong. So I actually just end up leading the river for $85. He takes no time before calling. I show my hand and he tables ace jack. So in this instance, I probably could have gotten my whole stack in there and would have gotten paid off at the end. In this final hand of the night, I got involved with probably the best player at the table. Kind of looked like a young Matt Hardy. I'm in +1 with ace king of spades. I open the action for $16. Young Matt Hardy calls from the button, and the loose guy from the last pot calls as well. We're off to the flop. The flop ends up being 9 high, and the action checks through, so we're off to the turn. The turn is a jack, so I still haven't connected here. The player in the blind checks, and I check, and the button leads for $25 here. The aggressive player in the blind calls, and so I'm getting about 4-1 to make a call. I think about raising, but if the guy in the button comes over the top, it's going to put me in a really tough spot for a big chunk of my stack. And if he just flat calls, then I still have to play this hand out of position on the river, so I just make the call. We're off 3 ways to the river. The river is a 9, so it pairs the board. The player in the big blind checks, and I decide to lead out for $65 here. Now, I know it's way too small of a bet. I'm giving my opponent 3-1 to make a call, virtually pricing him in. The button ends up tank calling, and the blind folds. The button shows queen jack offsuit for a pair of jacks. Looking back, it's not a bad play to try to represent the 9 when the straight and the flush draws miss, but how often am I opening ace 9 or jack 9 or 9-10 from that early of a position? There's arguments for a larger bet to apply pressure, but again, if he doesn't put me on a 9, then why should I bet anymore? Kind of amazing to just go back and relive the hand and process it all. So at this point, I've been playing for over 4 hours, and I'm just not playing well. I think I've found another hole in my game, and that's bet sizing. I'm just not making the right size bets to get the kind of action and responses that I'm hoping for. I have great ideas of how to play hands and how to represent hands, but my bets just don't make any sense to back up my story. So I decided to go ahead and rack up and call it a day.
Today was so eye-opening. I have so much work to do on bet sizing. I have the best ideas on how to play hands. My bets do not always correlate to that. I gotta do some work on my bet sizing. In for 500, out for 330. Like and subscribe. See you next time.
If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel for more poker content. And you can follow me on Instagram at 7cardflushpoker.